Kia ora koutou katoa. Thanks for having me here today. It's great to be back in Christchurch, and it's looking really good, isn't it? Yesterday I went for a short stroll after dinner around the river and through the parks, and 6 kilometres later I eventually managed to find my way home. But to be fair, it took me about 10 minutes to find my way on stage this morning, so may not be one of my strengths. My only slight grumble so far is that people in the hotel have mistaken my natural coloured hair for a sign of advanced age, whereas in fact I'm just a young man with a dream. And the dream is that people will go away today understanding what PTEs are and how they fit into the system, because I spend a lot of time explaining to people what they are. And even people in the education sector say to me, well, PTEs, yes, we know what they are, but they're all going to move to Te Pukenga, aren't they, under Rove? And I say, no, that's actually not the case. And they say, yeah, but vocational education, that's moving to Te Pukenga, isn't it? And I say, no. So clearly there's a bit of work to be done helping people to understand what a PT is. And I'm sure you careers advisors in this frankly intimidatingly large audience will understand more than others, but probably the people you engage with, the parents and the learners, don't. So what I hope today is that you'll go away with some more information that can help you add PTs to the suite of options you offer learners. So I've borrowed this title, The Fourth Estate, for my presentation because it was better than everything you want to know about PTEs. And it's got a loose connection. As you know, the Fourth Estate represents the media or the press, and in particular their role in advocating and in holding government to account. And that's part of the role of ITENs in this tertiary education environment. But I also chose it because the Education Act recognises 4 types of TEOs: universities, Te Pukenga, Wānanga, and PTEs. And PTEs are one of them. I could have chosen the first estate, which is the nobility, but we're a humble lot in the PTEs. So what I'm going to cover today is I'll give a bit of an introduction to ITENs and to PTEs. I'll talk about PTEs and what they are and how they fit into the regulatory environment and how they're quality assured. A few features and strengths of PTEs, and at the end a little bit about Rove. So let me start by telling you a little bit about ITENs. It's an industry association with 147 members, so directly representing about a third of all PTEs and indirectly representing the whole sector. And it's similar to CATE in that providers join because we advocate on their behalf. We try to simplify that complex information that comes out of government. We provide engagement and networking opportunities, and we provide support and professional development. And last month we had our ITENs conference in Auckland. And the members see membership as a sign that they're committed to quality and continuous improvement. And all ITENs members subscribe to a code of ethics, and NZQA usually recommends that new PTEs join a peak body such as ITENs. And we work closely with NZQA, and we work with other government agencies, the Ministry, Immigration New Zealand, TEC, who fund tertiary education. And we also work with the Workforce Development Councils, with the Centres of Vocational Excellence, Te Pukenga, all of whom, or many of whom, we have MOUs with, and with the RSLGs. And as a peak body, we're frequently consulted by government. We sit on a number of different advisory groups and working parties. For example, I'm on the Industry Advisory Board for Te Hatu, which we heard a bit about this morning. So that means that PTEs who are members of ITENs have some input into discussions on policy, and they keep up to date with changes, and it also means that government has a direct portal through to members. And one of the things we've been doing recently is trying to raise awareness of the role of PTEs, and that's part of the reason I'm here. And those who have flew down might have seen an article in the Kia ora magazine, page 94 if you're interested, featuring some graduates of PTEs and talking about some of the factors that contributed to their success, and I'll refer to some of them as we go. But I want to start by telling you a little bit about my own experience as a learner in a PTE. In 1987, I was in London and I was working as a motorcycle courier. Not a very good one, as it happened. It was winter and I was starting to fall off, and I had a couple of pretty close calls, and one day I dropped my keys down the grate on the side of the road, and I thought, that's a sign. So I moved to Spain and I spent almost a year there. And at the end of that, I did a course in what in New Zealand we'd call a PTE. And this was a course that had been developed back in 1962 by a guy called John Haycraft. And John Haycraft owned an English language school called International House. And International House went on to become one of the leading global chains of language schools. And John had identified a need for training people to teach English to adults. There was a lot of people coming out of universities with foreign language degrees, etc., but nothing about teaching English to adults. So he developed this course called the International House Preparatory Certificate, or the IH Prep Cert. And then by the time I did it, 25 years later, it was being administered by the Royal Society of Arts, and it was known as the RSA Certificate in Teaching English to, or in English language teaching to adults, or the CTEFLA. And then it's still going strong today, 60 years after it started, and now it's administered by Cambridge University Examinations, and it's called the Cambridge Certificate in English Language Teaching to Adults, or the Cambridge CELTA. And some of you will be familiar with this. It's taught in New Zealand, and it's not just taught in PTEs now. Universities have picked it up, polytechs have picked it up, and it's very popular with young people who want to travel, but also with people who are looking for a career change. And it's the most widely recognised pre-service English language teaching course in the world, and it's taught in 70 different countries. And it was a great course. It was intensive, it was hard work, it was stressful, but it was also exhilarating. And we learnt a lot about, not just about teaching, but how to teach. And we learnt what to expect when we went into a job, and we learnt how to continue to keep developing. And most people I've spoken to who have done it say it's one of the best courses they've done. Now, in my career, it's not the only qualification I've done. I've done a bachelor's degree and a diploma and a master's, and they all gave me credibility, and they gave me a depth of theoretical knowledge, and they opened doors to more senior roles. But it was that certificate that actually got me a job and got me onto a pathway to a career. And importantly, it also taught me what a good course looks like, and it taught me what good teaching looks like. And throughout my career, I've kind of used that as a benchmark. And so I want to take a moment to look at why that particular course was and still is good. So firstly, it was designed to meet an industry need. It was innovative. There was no other course like that at the time. It was developed by practitioners. So John had been a teacher, but he was also an employer who knew what his staff needed, and he was a businessman who knew what the industry needed. And it was taught by practicing teachers. So everybody who teaches on this is an industry practitioner. It's very practical. From day one, mind you, you are in a classroom teaching real students. And every day on that course, you're either teaching or you're watching your peers teach. It had small classes with a high teacher-student ratio, never more than about 20 in a class, never more than about 6 in a teaching practice group with a teacher. It was very learner-centred, both in its methodology and in the learner support, but also in the flexibility of delivery. You could do it full-time, part-time. There was not restricted by any semester start dates. It responded to changing times and changing needs, so methodologies have changed, theories have changed, the practice has changed, and it gained recognition from accrediting bodies. It was, and it still is, rigorously moderated and evaluated. And very importantly, it prepared you well for the job you were going into, and employers understood what they were getting when they got a graduate from that. So the reason I've talked about these things is that these are features that you'll find in most PTEs and are reflective of the strengths of PTEs, which I'm going to try and evidence as we go today. But first, let me introduce you to a couple of other people. This is Mike. Mike, for 20 years, was a truck driver. And then in 2015, he decided to do a bachelor's degree. So he did a Bachelor of Technology. After that, he went on to complete a master's in information technology, and he specialized in artificial intelligence. And now he's working as a transport operator in transport operations, and he's studying towards a PhD. And this is Ben. Ben's an Auckland-based filmmaker. He's known for his award-winning short film called Bygones and his editing work on Kiki Rockwell music videos, Same Old Energy and Cup Runneth Over. I did have to Google Kiki Rockwell, but she's on Spotify, 54,000 monthly followers, 1.3 million hits for one of those videos that Ben worked on. And he has a degree in sound engineering. Madison wanted to join the police force, but she was worried that she wouldn't be able to pass the academic or the physical test, and the recruitment officer recommended that she do a level 2 foundation course, a level 2 certificate. Now she's at police college, and she may well be out on the beat. And what do they have in common? I'm sure you know what I'm going to say. They all did their qualifications at PTEs. Mike did his bachelor and master's qualification at Auckland Institute of Studies. Ben did his degree at SAE, and Madison did her certificate at People Potential. And I think that when people do think about PTEs, they think about specialist courses such as the user pays course, CELTA, or alternatively, they think about options for those who haven't been successful at school or who may not want to follow an academic path. But as you can see from these, there's a lot more to PTEs than that. There's some. There are currently 389 PTEs registered with NZQA, and they're distributed around the country. Many have multiple sites. Last year, there were 52,000 students studying in PTEs, and that doesn't include many of the 150,000 learners who are on industry training or apprenticeships and who do their off-job study in a PTE. Almost 7,000 staff worked in PTEs, and PTEs were approved to offer 1,670 programs, leading to 760 distinct qualifications. And the qualifications they teach range from level 1 to level 10, level 1 being foundation level certificates, level 10 being PhDs. Admittedly, there is just one PTE offering a PhD, which is a medical doctorate actually, but if we were to look at degree level, for example, there's 138 bachelor programs offered in PTEs, leading to 73 unique bachelor degrees. So about 14%, or around 8,000 students, are doing degree level study or above in PTEs, and that represents about 14%. 86% are doing sub-degree or vocational education, and that sub-degree includes things like foundation, literacy and numeracy, industry training, apprenticeships, pre-employment qualifications. At degree level, we've got the bachelor's, master's, graduate diplomas, postgraduate diplomas. And then, of course, there's the work they do with high schools that you'll be familiar with, the trades academies, which are part of the Youth Guarantee initiative and offer that secondary, tertiary pathway, STAR programs where schools receive the funding and work with providers, and gateway-funded programs, which are about work experience, but often done with PTEs because they're employers or they have those industry connections. And the qualifications cover that wide range of subject areas, from agriculture to building to electrical, IT, health, you name it, it's covered. So that's a little bit about what they do. But you might be wondering, private, doesn't that just mean profit? What is this private? And how do I know they're any good? And how do I know the qualifications that somebody gets from a PTE is going to be recognised? So firstly, the private. Private really means not public, and we'd prefer that the term was independent, hence Independent Tertiary Education New Zealand. But private is what is used in the legislation. But ownership varies. There are owner-operated PTEs. There are some that are part of multinational chains, but there are also charitable trusts. There were iwi-owned PTEs, and there are some that are part of companies. For example, Genesis Energy and Transpower both have registered PTEs to train their own staff. Plunkett, Salvation Army, Air New Zealand, YMCA all have registered PTEs. ETCO, the electrical training company, is owned by the Master Electricians Association. So there's a whole range of different ownership types. Tertiary education is legislated for under the Education and Training Act, and as I said earlier on, the Act recognises 4 types of institutions. And PTEs have to be registered with NZQA before they can offer approved programs or micro-credentials. And when they do offer those sit on the New Zealand qualifications framework. And here's a basic overview of the system. If there are government people here, I hope I've got it right, but it's more or less what happens. So we've got Cabinet determining the tertiary education budget. We've got the Ministry of Education determining tertiary education policy, and then the Tertiary Education Commission is responsible for implementing that funding policy, for setting funding conditions, for distributing funding, and for evaluating funding outcomes. And then we've got NZQA, who registers PTEs. They oversee program approval and qualification approval, quality assurance of all TEOs, except universities who have their own system, and they administer the code of practice for pastoral care. And then newly into the system, we have the Workforce Development Councils, and they will take over some of that NZQA work. They will determine industry qualifications and skill standards. They'll endorse programs. They'll moderate assessments as part of a quality assurance process. And then we've also got Ministry of Social Development, who set policy for student loans and allowances. So what I'm trying to say here is the regulations relating to qualifications, to program approvals, delivery, to quality assurance are all the same for PTEs as they are for the publicly owned providers. And there's a very comprehensive quality assurance process which applies to all PTEs and to polytechs. And I don't expect you to read that list on the side, but just to note that it's really long. There is a lot of stuff that's quality assured in the PTEs. Any approvals for programs, accreditation, consistency of programs between different providers, monitoring of assessments, evaluating the organisation, managing risk. And I'll just talk a little bit about this external evaluation and review process, because this is the big thing that PTEs and polytechs go through. It's similar to an ERO. It happens every 4 years, and it looks back over those 4 years, and it's based on evidence which is triangulated by looking at data from various sources and talking to key stakeholders, including staff, students, employers, advisory groups, etc. And they look at 6 key evaluation questions, which cover these areas: how well students achieve, what the value of outcomes is for key stakeholders, how well program design and delivery, including learning and assessment, match the needs of students and stakeholders, how effectively students are supported and involved in their learning, the effectiveness of governance and management, and the effectiveness of managing compliance accountabilities. And out of that come statements of confidence. And you've probably heard about Category 1, 2, 3, and 4 providers. These are categories that apply to PTEs and to polytechs. And in the PTE system, 94% are Category 1 or 2. So these are providers that NZQA is confident or highly confident in their performance. I mentioned the Code of Practice of Pastoral Care. I won't talk much about it, but you might be familiar with it, particularly those of you who work with international students. There's been a Code of Practice for the pastoral care of international students for many years. This new Code of Practice applies to all TEOs, including universities, PTEs, and it focuses on student well-being. And one of the key changes in this is complaints processes. And so the slide I've got up here is the Tertiary Education Disputes Resolution Scheme. So what this means is that learners in any tertiary organisation, if they've exhausted the internal complaints process, now have an independent disputes resolution body that they can go to. As far as funding goes, registered PTEs with NZQA approved programs can apply for funding from TEC, and when they're approved funding, the amounts they receive, the conditions attached to them are the same as for equivalent programs in any other organisation. And of course, students have access to loans and allowances. So that means that learners studying for the same qualification in a public institution or a private provider end up paying the same or similar fees. So I'm just going to summarise, and I'll let you read that while I get some water. So, those are similarities between PTEs and the public sector. So what is it then that distinguishes PTEs? So let's go back to that example of the course that I did in Barcelona. And the strengths of that course very much reflect the strengths of PTEs. And that's evidenced by the EERs and by data, and I'll talk a little bit more shortly. But they're responsive to needs and changes. They're innovative. They have strong industry connections, small class sizes, very learner-centred. They're often taught by people from the industry. They're well recognised. They're highly regulated. They're quality assured, and they often have flexibility around when students can study. And this is what the Minister of Education has said about PTEs. I don't know how visible that is at the back, but hopefully it is. And he's also said this. So he's saying that he expects PTEs to play an important role now and in the future. And I just want to pick up on a couple of things that he talks about in this quote on the right here. And I've already mentioned how focusing on learners is a strength of PTEs, but how do we know how well they do that? Well, one way is through the reports that come out of the EER process. And I mentioned those 6 evaluation questions, and the evaluation question number 4 is how well learners are supported and involved in their learning. And I looked back at the 32 PTEs that have had an EER report published this year, and of those, 27 were rated excellent and 5 were rated good. And the kind of things that come out of those reports are things like this. They talk about honest and respectful relationships. They talk about active, integrated and ongoing social and academic support, responding to the multiple needs of students, individualised support, minimising learning barriers, and seeking and engaging with student voice. And these might look like they're cherry-picked comments, but if you look at the reports, they're all published on the NZQA website, and each provider should also have a link to them. You'll see that there is a theme there. And if I go back to those learners that we profiled, remember Madison did the foundation level course, and this is what she had to say. Mike, who did a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. and Ben, who did his degree at SAE. So there's another point that I just want to touch on quickly, and that sounds a bit corny, but passion. Because PTs are often started and owned by people who are passionate about education. And let me give you an example of that in practice. There's a PTE in Northland. It has almost 800 full-time equivalent students, and about half of those students are on Youth Guarantee level 1 to 3. And Youth Guarantee is there to re-engage or engage learners back into the system. So this provider has funding for that, but only 3% of their funding is allowed to be used for level 3 courses. So what they've got students who have been disengaged, they've engaged them, they've got them level 1 and 2, and now they've got no funding to get them to level 3, and really they want to get them to level 4 because that's where government wants learners to be. So they pay for the students to do their level 3 qualification. And then, so the learners have now got a level 3 qualification, many of them at the provider's expense, but then they hit another roadblock, which is that because those learners have done a zero fees qualification, even though it's paid for by the provider, they're not entitled to the government-funded fees-free year. So they've gotten to level 3 and now they can't do level 4. So after some intensive lobbying by the provider and by ITENS, earlier this month, government approved eligibility for those learners to access fees-free. So that's a win for learners and for everybody. Because the owners of that school know that learning will transform those people's lives, and that's why they do it. And that's kind of what you want from somebody who's providing you with education. And as, again, the Minister has said, PTs are very good at putting learners at the centre. And the other area he talked about in that earlier quote was engagement with employers. And again, if you looked at EER reports, they talk about things like improved outcomes, skills that meet skills shortages, employers benefiting from work-ready staff with the necessary skills and able to work autonomously, highly regarded training. I know it looks like I'm channeling Chris Hipkins a lot, but this is his thing, this is his area, and what he says is important. And he says, PTs are innovative, nimble, and adaptable. And they have strong links with employers. So that's all great. But how do we know how well learners achieve? And one way is through the data that's provided by TEC. I've got a clock down there. I'm not sure what it means. I think it's a countdown, or it's how long I've gone. Anyway, and if we look at that data, so on the left, we've got course completion rates in 2021. This is for all levels, from level 1 to PhD. And you can see orange on the right is where PTEs sit. They're behind universities, but they're ahead of the other two providers. And then if we look on the right, sub-degree, remember 86% of PTE learners are sub-degree level, and you can see how well they do compared to other parts of the system. Now, a very important part within this is the priority that government has for Māori and Pacific achievement. And again, we've got a similar graph. On the left is level 1 to 10, and on the right is the sub-degree level. So PTEs do very well with supporting Māori achievement, and again, Pacific achievement. In fact, the difference between PTEs and universities has shrunk, and the difference between PTEs and the other sectors has increased. So they support learners, they work with employers, and they do a good job in achieving results. Now, onto Rove. And you'll no doubt be aware of some of those changes, and I'm sure over the course of the next couple of days you'll hear quite a lot about it. And there's been a lot in the news, as you know, about Te Pūkenga and its role in vocational education. There's been talk about the disestablishment of the industry training organisations and the creation of WDCs, but it's been accompanied by quite a lot of confusion, I think, and quite a lot of noise around one part of the sector and less visibility around another part. And as I said right at the beginning, a commonly held view is that vocational education is moving to Te Pukenga, and that's not correct. Vocational education will continue to be delivered by PTEs, Te Pukenga and Wānanga. Now that doesn't mean there aren't challenges for PTEs, including issues around funding and some of the mandates that have been introduced. And in some cases, that has led to existential concerns for providers. And one of the main challenges, as I mentioned earlier, is retaining visibility at a time when there is a lot of attention focused on the big changes. So the goal of ROVE is to have a vocational education system that is ready for a fast-changing future of skills, learning and work. And we've already heard the Minister say that PTEs are innovative, nimble and adaptable to the changing needs of workforce. And he's also said that the critical role of PTEs within the vet sector needs to be maintained. So that's a pretty good indication that PTEs are not going anywhere. And a key part of this is PTEs offer choice. So learners have a choice of where they can study. But for this to be maintained, we do need to ensure that their contribution is understood more widely. And we do need to constantly ensure that regulatory levers don't disadvantage PTEs, either intentionally or unintentionally. And we need to ensure that the funding that they receive is appropriate to cover the delivery costs. Now, a major change that I talked about is the disestablishment of ITOs and the splitting of their primary roles of developing industry standards and qualifications and arranging training. So in blue are the two main roles that ITOs had, and the role of developing standards and qualifications now sits with the Workforce Development Councils. And the second function is arranging training. Now, arranging training covers the activities needed to develop and maintain arrangements for work-based training for learners, through employers for the on-job part and through providers for the off-job part. And previously, it was ITOs that received the funding to do this. They're called receiving organisations. And then they would contract out that work to PTEs or to Pukenga. Now, under ROVE, that function of arranging training and assessing apprentices can sit with Te Pukenga or with PTEs or with Wānanga. And under this new model, those three entities can, as well as arranging the training, actually deliver the training themselves. That's different from the previous ITO model. So what that means is that PTEs, Te Pukenga or Wānanga will receive money from TEC for training and assessing apprentices in particular industries. And then they'll either deliver that training themselves or they'll contract it out. And I think that's where some of the confusion has arisen, because yes, ITOs for the most part have moved their arranging training operations to Pukenga, but 8 PTEs also have an arranging training function. Now, we would have liked that to have been more and to have PTEs have more opportunity to participate at this early stage. That wasn't the case. We lobbied hard for it, but from 2024, that will be the case, and more PTEs will be able to apply to be receiving organisations and to deliver work-based learning. But I want to reiterate, what we're talking about here is the arranging training function. So those receiving the funding for work-based training can either deliver it themselves or they can contract it out. So for example, while Te Pūkenga may receive funding for work-based training, they might also decide to contract some of that out to PTEs to deliver it. So, PTEs will continue to play a critical part in vocational education. And again, the Minister said they'll play an important role in ensuring that the system is focused on learners, supports employers, and realises the underlying strategic intent of the ROVE program. And this also includes serving those learners who have previously been underserved. It'll play an increasingly important role in industry training and apprenticeships from 2024, when there are more opportunities to do the arranging training. And meanwhile, they'll also continue to do what they already do, which is being funded to support learners who are disengaged from mainstream education, and being funded and offering qualifications at all levels, including sub-degree, degree, postgraduate. As far as ITENS goes, with ROVE, we've worked hard to establish relationships with other parts of the system. The idea of ROVE is that it's a collaborative model with the different parts working together. So we will continue to work closely with workforce development councils and regional skills leadership groups to support and ensure high quality training and assessment of programs that meet industry and stakeholder needs. And we'll work closely with the Centres of Vocational Excellence to share advice and guidance and to support and promote lifelong learning. And we'll work closely with Te Pūkenga to perform arranging training functions, to identify areas for collaboration, and to use Te Pūkenga's Te Tiriti o Waitangi Excellence Framework to ensure we honour commitments to Te Tiriti partners. And then ITENS, of course, will also play a key role in advocacy for learners and in ensuring ROVE meets the outcomes intended. So, there we have it. Here's a summary of what I hope I've covered. So PTEs provide students with a positive, supportive, safe learning environment that gets them work ready with a recognised and recognisable qualification. They're innovative and they're responsive, and their particular strengths include learner-centredness and strong employer connections. We've heard from the Minister that they're a critical part of the tertiary sector. They're highly regulated and they're of high quality, and their role in vocational education will be maintained and enhanced under ROVE. I'm just going to finish with a quote from a provider. So, that's it from me. Thank you. Yeah, any easy ones.
Can we take any questions if you have them now? There's microphones down the front here or halfway down. If you've got a question and you're not just going to the loo, if you put your hand up so we can make sure that we see you.
I've got one question.
Yeah. Yes. It's on, I think.
Is it on?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Just want you to elaborate what you mean when you talk about arranging training function. It's quite a new catchword.
Yeah. So under an apprenticeship model, an apprentice has a tripartite agreement between the learner, the employer, and the person who is arranging training. And the person, or the organisation that's arranging training, it's kind of overseeing their whole apprenticeship experience, including what they do in the workplace, assessing them as they go through, identifying where they do their off-job training, etc. So that function previously was held by the industry training organisations. Under the new model, that function can sit with Te Pūkenga or with a PTE or with Wānanga. And in order to become an organisation that arranges training requires approval through TEC.
So in other words, we in schools will start to see more PTEs gaining that approval. And so if we place a student with a PTE that has that approval, they will then be contracted, in a sense, to actually arrange their apprenticeship?
The apprenticeships normally arranged through the employer. So the school would be putting the learner with an employer or with an organisation like ETCO, which does both employment and apprenticeships, and they would be the one who sorts out the contract.
The school or ETCO, for example?
The school wouldn't be the ones dealing with the arranging trainer, I don't think. They'd be dealing with the employer.
Okay. And then the list of 8 PTEs that have this, is it available on TC's website? Do we know where that is at the moment?
Probably. So they'll be for
thank you.
particular industries,
Yep.
for example, boating or meat processing. For example. There are some WDC people in the exhibition area whose knowledge extends beyond mine for this bit. Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Can we give a big round of applause, please, to Wayne Dyer?
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you very much.